Hi everyone, welcome. It is the BC Poly Hot Stove, and we are back after a week off due to technical difficulties. My technical difficulties. I'm Jordan Bateman, the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Business Association, live in Burnaby, British Columbia. Joined as always by...
I'm Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I wish the viewers could see the difference between our two studios so that they could savor the fact that you had the technical difficulties and not me. Because this is, my friends, as ghetto as it gets in here.
Well, that is, I believe, taxpayer money being used over there, is it not? To,
Yes,
get the
taxpayer money
out.
from the 70s.
Get the message out from the ledge to the real world. All right, well, it is... we're in the middle of a federal election.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening. We can't stop it, Maclean.
We'd like to try, but we can't.
I just want to get off this election. I'm tired of the election already. But let's start with the big news. And first of all, let's start with some good news. Maclean,
Yes.
Congratulations. The 1-year anniversary today of the Orca swimming into the big, strange, crazy world of BC politics. Maclean, you are still swimming. How do you feel?
I feel good. It's 1 year ago today. We launched, and I had to go back and look. There's a piece I wrote this morning. It was everyone. We got the resident pod to share a favorite piece they'd written over the past year and a favorite piece that somebody else had done. I shouldn't say written because some of them were podcasts. And I had to go back and look what we did on day one because I had forgotten. And we have published over 600 pieces of content. And it's actually much more than that because that doesn't include our election blog. It doesn't include Bob Price's daily business beat, and it doesn't include the Fin. So, I mean, it's, we're pumping out a lot of great stuff.
That's like 1,000 pieces of content. Look at us. It's
Yeah.
impressive. Yeah, see the little fish that could. Off it swims, continuing on. What was the first piece? Probably an intro from you, I would
It was our first day. We ran an intro from me, just explaining what the Orca was. We had a piece from Jody Vance, her debut column, talking about tribalism and how it's toxic, and a guest piece from former chairman of the board at BC Hydro, Brad Bennett.
That's right, Brad Bennett. He wrote because Horgan was running around claiming that that WAC Bennett would be doing union-only monopolies if he was still around, and Brad Bennett totally debunked that.
Brad took some issue with that characterization. Yes, that would be a fair way of putting it.
Just a little. Yes. So I forgot about that piece. That was a great piece.
It was.
Excellent. Well, I'll go. I have not looked at the site to see who picked me as their favorite contributor. I assume all of them did. So
you actually, you had a few.
I did. Really?
You did. And you know what? No one picked me. Not a single person.
Aww.
Not one. I'm feeling a little hurt. I got to up my game in year 2.
I'm sorry. You're just much too straight-laced and serious about everything. You have to...
that must be it. I'm going to have to be
wildly.
more Don Cherry.
You have to swing wildly. Like I'm kind of the Vladdy Guerrero Jr. of this platform. I may get a couple home runs, but I'll strike out just as often.
In year 2, I will unleash my inner Bateman.
That's right. Please do. All right. Well, congratulations. Thank you, of course, to everyone who's watching this, who's been reading this stuff and sharing it. I noticed that closing in on 4,000 Facebook page likes, which is great for the little fish. It's a pretty impressive. And I understand 20,000 podcast downloads, which is amazing as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool for sure.
Yeah, the numbers have grown since day one, and we're going to keep growing. We're going to keep doing this.
Yeah, if only Rex Murphy would write again. Come on, Rex.
I'm working on it. Come on. Come back home, Rex.
Love that guy. All right, well, let's talk UBCM, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. It was the big story last week, and you'll still hang over into this week. And really, it seems like 2 kind of major themes came out of that. Number one, the degeneration of the NDP's relationship with the municipalities. Not everything is hunky-dory anymore. And then kind of parallel to that, and in some ways crossing over a little bit, the forestry crisis, the big convoy coming to Vancouver of forestry trucks, forcing the provincial media and the municipal politicians from across the province to take notice of exactly what's going on in those communities. Which one do you think will have? Which one do you want to tackle first? What do you think?
Well, let's talk about the forestry one and the protest trucks, because that was quite a. Normally, protests of that sort don't get the same kind of, I'm going to use the word respect, from the provincial and national media, but this one did, because we've run out of words to describe what's going on in the forestry forestry industry in this province. It's a crisis. It's a disaster. It's a colony collapse. And the NDP have been not seen to be doing a whole lot about it this summer. And so for the logging trucks to roll through Vancouver and be greeted with, applause and support, while the NDP kind of had to just sort of sit and watch. I mean, if we're going to be honest here, the NDP were happy to wink and indeed partake in every single protest when they were in opposition. It must be, let's say, awkward for them when the shoe is on the other foot.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And look, I think a few things made this special. First of all, the way Vancouver has built out and its sort of anti-vehicle rhetoric, bringing logging trucks into that environment, would be interesting even if it was just 10 of them. Like, how would 10 get through? And, then you hear 200. The fact that they started in Merritt, rolled down the Coquihalla, and people were waiting on overpasses for them and waving. There was like pro-forestry signs and we're with you signs all along the way. The fact that, the provincial media, I think the CTV news chopper picked them up in Abbotsford and was showing them coming in. Like, it really made a big difference. It was an excellent media event. And then you had all those municipal politicians and BC Liberal politicians and other folks at the UBCM. And of course, every single politician has a Twitter, they have an Instagram, they have a Facebook. They're always looking for interesting content. So, they're all, live streaming and putting videos out as much as they can. There were two huge protests last week. There was that, and there was the climate protest in Vancouver. I think obviously the climate protest drew more people, but I think the forestry one drew more eyeballs. It definitely drew more media attention.
I think that's right. The climate protest, the one in Vancouver, kind of, I don't want to say got lost. It was a big deal, but I mean, it was a global event, and the events in Victoria and Vancouver didn't get as much attention as the ones in Montreal, for example. But the forestry one was particular to Vancouver, and it was so unusual. I mean, you're exactly right. Can you imagine having driven those narrow streets in downtown Vancouver, even trying to take a logging truck, much less 10 or 20? That is astonishing to me that they managed to do that. I don't even like driving my
minivan down there. Like, that's, and so that was really incredible. And kudos to the group that put that together. And look, these were men and women whose livelihoods on the line. They sprung for the gas themselves. There was no big, company giving them money to help pay for them and something. This is something they did because they felt was important. And it worked. They brought attention to this. Now, the rural clawback, which is, the NDP mind-bogglingly taking money from rural projects such as water system renewals and downtown revitalizations and taking that and putting it towards their logging or their forestry fund to help displaced workers, which we all agree, there should be one. Taking money out of water systems and important projects doesn't make a lot of sense in a $45 or $50 billion a year budget. The NDP really walked into this bear trap, and they don't seem to realize that they need to gnaw their leg off to get out of this thing.
No, well, you're exactly right. I have a piece coming later today about this, and you've covered a lot of the same ground that I attempt to. Only, of course, you put it better. It must be galling if you're in one of these rural communities to be waiting all summer. It has been just a devastating summer. I think it's something like 150 total weeks of mill closures so far this year. So far. There's more to come. 10 mills either closed or in some cases permanently shut down. I mean, this is the equivalent of Vancouver losing 100,000 jobs overnight. I mean, in the communities where these mills are, this is devastating, doesn't cover it. So, I mean, it's difficult to describe the impact this is having. And so when you're seeing sort of a summer where not a lot happened, at least visibly in these communities from the provincial government, and then they finally do announce a $69 million bailout package for affected workers. And by affected workers, I mean people who have lost their jobs. And it's coming from money. It's not new money. It's coming from programs that were already going to rural communities. It's just, there was no sort of urban program you could temporarily put on hold, the free concert tickets, that kind of thing. I realize governments can walk and chew gum at the same time, but if you are in one of these communities, it must be especially grating.
Well, and it was a very light year from a forest fire perspective.
Yep.
Take the money that you would have used on forest fires.
Yep.
You're still coming out way ahead, but it does show you that things are not hunky-dory in the financial situation of the BC government because, Yeah,
They're
this
being
does make sense.
unusually cautious. Put it that way.
Yeah, and it's no surprise why. I mean, winter is coming. We've been saying at ICBA for about a year and a half since the very first indicators started popping up. And, I was mowing my lawn on the weekend, not to brag to those of you watching from snowy Calgary, but I was mowing my lawn on the weekend and a couple weeks ago, and there was a mushroom that had popped up. And so I put the lawnmower over it. And guess what? I went back and mowed the lawn a couple weeks later, and now there were 3 or 4 mushrooms. That's what happens in a recession. One sign you can kind of ignore, and then another, and eventually you have to deal with the issue. The mushrooms are popping up on Carol James's bank accounts, and something needs to give. So there was the rural clawback, and that kind of leads into the second part, which is this deterioration of the relationship between the John Horgan NDP and the UBCM, the mayors and councillors and regional directors from across the province. And look, opposition leaders are being in opposition is a lot like being the backup quarterback. You're everyone's favorite player. Like you're not in the game, right? You're not calling the plays. You're not sending the signals. You don't have the checkbook. So you can't make mistakes. The problem is once you are in the game, Khalil Mack is coming for you, and he's going to sack you. So Horgan, has courted these municipalities quite heavily pre-2017 election. He was treated as a conquering hero for relieving them from the evils of 16 years of BC Liberal rule and the arrogance of Christy Clark and a community charter that still forced them to do public hearings and all these different things that they had against the BC Liberals. And now we're finding, guess what, governing is hard. You can't please everyone all the time. And the knives are really out or are starting to come out for John Horgan on a number of priorities, including this rural clawback.
And I think you're calling them priorities, and they are priorities, but it's choices that are made. And I think the NDP are smart enough to know that if they go into the next provincial election, which is less than 2 years away now, with a deficit, after inheriting the largest surplus in the history of the province, that's a problem. And from their sort of cold political calculation, that might be a worse problem than pouring a lot of new money into the forestry crisis. It's a cynical way to look at it, but I am sure that they know that they absolutely, under no circumstances, cannot go into the next election with a deficit. They will not live that down.
Yeah. Boy, they should just quit wasting money on union-only monopolies. What a great idea. Listen, you're starting to see, I know today or tomorrow, the TransLink mayors are meeting to talk about what should be done with the Massey Tunnel. It would be interesting to see if it seems like Horgan's kind of telegraphing he wants to go underwater. That's bad from an environmental point of view. It's easier to go above, try not to actually touch the riverbed with pilings. It would make it quicker, make it cheaper. We'll see what the mayors come up with. But if he disagrees with them, he'll be in an interesting spot where, much like Kevin Falcon on Canada Line, will he override the mayors to do what he wants? That's the first thing. And then you see, employer health tax, I think, was the very first sign of this kind of deterring relationship. I remember, and here you go, within the last year of the Orca, I remember you writing a piece, Maclean, about how the employer health tax was essentially provincial downloading on the municipality, something John Horgan swore he would never do. And you got him you asked him at a scrum or a media conference, and he was a little bit chastened by it. Like, yeah, you know what? You're kind of right. I can see their point.
His quote, because I just listened to it again yesterday, was "Your point is a good one," and he called it a good question twice. And then didn't commit to doing anything about it down the road, but conceded that the point was reasonable, which he doesn't always do. So yeah, you're right. It's kind of like we've been saying, governing is hard.
Speaking of governing is hard, Rob Shaw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Got out the hypocrisy meter. I don't know how you guys can stand all the hypocrisy that you have to face over there. Governments saying one thing in opposition, then doing another once they're in power. But tell me about freedom of information.
Oh man.
Go ahead.
Well, you got to, let's give Rob Shaw his due. This is a great story. And if you're watching and you haven't read it yet on the Vancouver Sun, you should, because it's good stuff. As you will recall, the minister responsible for citizen services and things like FOI, Ginny Sims, has been caught a few times now using personal email for government business, which is not allowed. The BC Liberal opposition research crew, I had the very bright idea of looking at what they had found so far to find email addresses from personal email addresses of those people who had been using their personal email addresses to do government business. If you're following me so far, what they did then is requested information of basically all the records of those emails in government databases.
So
So in other words, they were looking for the smoking gun of
yeah.
people continuing to use their personal emails to do government business. You would think that the NDP's been caught with their hand in the cookie jar twice, that they'd come back no records, because of course this has stopped. And if it did happen once or twice, it would have been an accident. Oh, I switched between accounts on my iPhone. It happens. Instead, what they've done is they fought it tooth and nail. They've brought the lawyers in. They're saying it would damage the reputations of those involved, which is kind of a tacit admission that there's more to see there. The NDP seems quite happy to apparently rag the puck on this and hope that they can fight it in the courts, well, for the next, let's say 2 years. But it is not a good look for a government that made hay, deservedly so, on using personal emails and skirting FOI rules. They are sure doing a good job of it now.
Yeah, the FOI commissioner just shredded their defense.
Yeah.
So essentially what we're saying is first of all, let's give credit to the BC Liberal Caucus, who, forgetting for a moment that they're complete hypocrites on this file and used to do the same nonsense and triple delete and all that. But, they certainly know, I got to hand it to them. They're doing some very creative things through FOI. I've been watching FOI requests. What they do is they post them all online after a period of time. You can see what everyone has requested and got. And the way they word certain requests, very creative, very interesting use of FOI. And I don't know who's doing that for the Liberals, but kudos. That's exactly what an opposition should be doing. But so what they've essentially did is they went on like LinkedIn and was like, oh, Jeff Meggs was a consultant for 6 months and had this personal email address listed. And so then they essentially went and said, we want any government email to or from jeffmeggs@gmail.com or whatever it was. That is very creative FOI usage. Perfectly legal, perfectly within the spirit of the law, which is to make sure
legal for them to FOI it, not to be doing government
exactly.
business with.
Exactly. And we need to remember, we call it freedom of information, but this information does not belong to government. Government are the taxpayers. It belongs to the taxpayers of the province of British Columbia. We should be able to get this information, with certain caveats, that don't damage BC's long-term interests. But certainly, a cabinet minister embarrassed because he or she or an assistant were using private email addresses does not fall into that category. So where does it go from here? They're going to drag it through court now? Is that what?
Yeah, well, they've already brought in the lawyers, and it sounds like they're going to continue to fight it, even though the FOI commissioner has told them that they shouldn't, that it's pretty cut and dried, actually. So what this suggests to me is, though those records have been collected, and the NDP government has seen them and does not want them released on pain of death, and if they are willing to take the embarrassment of being seen to kind of admit that there's stuff there rather than you actually see it, then wow, it must be pretty bad. I would be the first to say that it is normal for political staffers to use personal email to talk to each other about, weekend plans, stuff that doesn't have anything to do with work. And I will also admit that occasionally it would be natural for a work conversation to drop into a chain. That's the point when you say, we got to move this over to government email. We can't talk about it here. The point I'm making is that it's not wrong for them to have personal emails and to be talking to each other. It is wrong for them to be deliberately skirting FOI to do government business. At least that is what the law says. And if they want to change things, then they should change the law. They have the ability.
Yes, absolutely. In the meantime, release those documents. If there's a whistleblower out there who has access to those documents and would like to leak them, Jordan at icba.ca. I'm sure editor at the Orca.ca would be happy to take those as well. You just feel free to pass those along, whistleblower. We'll help you make sure that the public interest is served. By the way, on this, slightly tangential to this hypocrisy file, government advertising. Remember when the Liberals were in power and, government ads were the worst thing ever, said the NDP, and we'll never do it that way. And, they even suggested that the old Ontario model of having the Auditor General approve every single government ad to make sure it was necessary and statutory and not tagged to a precise political party. Well, that's gone by the wayside too, which is just more hypocrisy from the NDP. There you go. That one always bugs me. The old taxpayer advocate in me, that drives me crazy, government ads. So, speaking of court cases,
hey,
where we're wasting lots of
I was
money.
going to say, speaking of hypocrisy, I think we both went to the same place.
BC, a rare victory for David Eby in court. It was bound to happen. Even a blind man finds or what was even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. That's the saying.
Indeed, they do.
The BC NDP won was it an injunction? Anyways, they're not going to.
Yes.
The court's not going to let Alberta turn off the taps of beautiful, beautiful, sweet Alberta crude coming to British Columbia. This was a threat put in by the Notley government and then passed by the Kenney government to, kind of strong arm British Columbia into supporting Trans Mountain. But what I think has happened here is two things. Number one, CNDP weren't exactly running around taking a victory lap on this victory, on this particular court win, even though they desperately needed a court win and hadn't had one in forever. And the reason why, of course, is they know as well as we do that by winning this, they've really just kind of cut their own throats in the much broader case, which is Alberta's challenge that BC can stop oil and gas from flowing through the Trans Mountain pipeline.
Yes. If you're familiar with the phrase a Pyrrhic victory, I think that's exactly what's happened here. Suzanne Anton, former Attorney General, has a very good piece on this up at the Orca. And the way she puts it is, if Alberta is compelled to ship oil to BC, then it must also logically be allowed to ship oil through BC. The same arguments that the government of BC, as you say, successfully employed, demonstrating that the Alberta's oil is absolutely a fundamental component of the provincial economy, and cutting it off for spite or any other reason would have profound consequences here. I think over in the Alberta Premier's office, and in fact most normal people watching this would say, yes, that's true.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yes, they shouldn't. We continue to use it every day, so we should probably not have it choked off or artificially capped.
Yeah, no, I don't know what else to say. It's just common sense. So
no,
I guess we'll see what happens. I guess we'll see what happens next. The old term "hoisted on your petard," on your own petard, comes to mind. We will wait and see what goes on now. Maclean. Elizabeth May has done many things in her life, but now she's coming after my Roomba and my BB-8. What's going on here?
Yes. Yeah, well, Elizabeth May has introduced a tax on robots. Yes, that's apparently this is not how, like the first prequel chapter of the Terminator movies, this is not how they rise up and revolt against us, no taxation without representation. But it is an attempt to appeal to those who feel they're being pushed out of jobs by robots. This is me attempting to keep a straight face. I
for one welcome our new robot overlords.
I don't even know what to say. I can't even. There is a robot tax. I think it was Colby Kosh on Twitter who says that, all parties have examples of policies that make it sound as though we all work on, 16th century fish farms. Yep. And this is the Green Party's one. I mean, were we not all just competing over, data center Amazon to move to our jurisdictions? Does not the BC government proudly tout the thriving tech industry in this province, and rightly so?
Doesn't Andrew Weaver continually harp on about an innovation commissioner?
Exactly. And it's not the worst idea. But apparently, Microsoft and, people who make cars in the aerospace industry here in town is not all done by hand. If you've got a robot, Elizabeth May wants to tax it.
Yeah, okay, so here's a few things that drive me a little bit crazy about this. First of all, okay, slight kudos to Elizabeth May. No one else is talking about automation and the effect on the economy in this political campaign. And it's something that we should be talking about. Certainly we're talking about in the construction industry. I know in various industries across the board, we're talking about how to deal with it. That said, how the heck would you define what a robot is? Like, we joke around about the Roomba, but the Roomba puts a housekeeper out of work.
It's true.
The order kiosks at McDonald's, they're not robots. They're just computer screens. But in her world, I'm sure she would consider those robots. What about automated? Like, when was the last time you waited in line at a bank, Maclean? Like,
it's been years.
You do your online banking. You do your ATM. Are those robots?
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Not to mention the fact that it's racist against C-3PO, R2-D2, BB-8, and other heroes of the rebellion, and I will not stand for that in any circumstance. It's just one of those policies that, people are like, yeah, robot tax, yeah, okay. Yeah. But then you actually start to peel it back, you're like, wait a minute, this would be absolutely bonkers policy.
Yeah. Hey, drones have been used to great effect on marine research.
Right.
Tracking endangered species and bringing in more data. You could argue that puts a marine biologist in a helicopter out of work.
Well,
I mean,
cars, like, shouldn't we have someone actually taking us by wagon if somewhere like down the
it's
street? Like, why are we allowing cars to exist? They have computers in them. Like, you just like the unintended consequences of a foolish law like this are
yeah.
astounding. Fortunately, Elizabeth May will never, ever, 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 ever be near any levers of power that could possibly bring this in.
Well, stranger things have happened, but I think you are right on that one.
Stranger things have not happened. I don't care. We live in the era of Trump, and I'm still saying it would be much stranger for Elizabeth May to be Prime Minister of Canada than it would be for the
Oh,
world
you
we live
didn't
in
say
now.
prime minister. You said anywhere near the levers of power.
Anywhere, okay, well, pardon me. Okay. Anywhere where she
gonna-
can put in this kind of nonsense.
Fair
God
enough.
help us all. All right. Speaking of technological innovation, Todd Stone, he's mad about vaping. And
Yes.
turns out...
Has been for some time.
Yeah, and it turns out, look, there's some scare tactics out there. Some people are saying like as many as 2/3 of teenagers are vaping. That doesn't seem to be the experience that I've seen around high schools. You can't
I
get
don't buy it.
2/3 of kids to do anything. But certainly there are the first major kind of health studies coming out of the United States generally, the first cancer illnesses. And it does seem like vaping is not the healthy, wonderful thing that maybe it's been marketed to be.
Yeah, and it's a little frightening actually, because every day it does seem to bring another story of someone dying or even vaping industries. Is it Juul who's the leader in the States, sort of
Yes,
quietly
yeah.
pulling back all of their advertising and stuff like that, in favor of much healthier cigarettes? It's Hey, I neither vape nor smoke, so I will not claim technical expertise. But at the very least, this is a new phenomenon, and it is entirely possible there is a lot that we missed on the first go around.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stone is bringing in legislation or challenging the NDP to, first of all, tackle the flavored syrups. Is that what they're called? I don't know.
Yeah,
The
I think
flavor
so.
that make the vaping attractive, the bubble gum, the kind of the kid
Ugh.
focused flavors.
Yeah.
He wants to get rid of those. He wants much tougher laws on vaping. He wants, I think 21 and under or 19 and under before you can actually buy a vape pipe. Sorry, I don't vape either. I don't smoke. We're like
How old do we sound right now?
I know. Yeah.
First with their
Hello.
rock and roll music.
Yes. Greetings, young people. I'm here to talk to you about the vapes. Okay. Anyways, good on Todd Stone. This is an issue that I
Yeah.
think should transcend politics. A little surprised Adrian Dix and John Horgan have been so brisk with him on this. Like, to me, this would be a good example of, yeah, we're going to take ideas from wherever, we're going to reach across party lines. Remember 2 years ago when that was the consensus of the election? British Columbians don't want partisanship. They want us to reach across party lines. It doesn't matter where ideas come from. Well, it does. They can only come from Adrian Dix or John Horgan, apparently. Todd Stone can't possibly have a decent idea about vaping. So hopefully they address this. They only have a 5-week session this fall. Sounds like they're going to waste a lot of time on very convoluted legislation that like UNDRIP that no one really wants or understands how it would actually impact British Columbia.
Yeah.
Vaping to me seems like one of the things they need to get on the board this fall.
Well, and you're right. It would be an easy thing for them to say, yes, we're working across party lines on an issue like this. And it would be a great issue to pick because it's not one that is going to be decisive in an election. I don't know if you're a swing voter, you're going to be like, well, no, the BC Liberals had the idea on vaping, so there's my vote. I mean, it's an important issue, but I don't think it'll be decisive one in the ballot box.
No.
And I think that it would have been a good one for the NDP to say, hey, yeah, no, actually, we're the party that does listen to ideas from everyone. But of course, so far, at least, that has not happened.
No, it has not. All right. Politicians need to get a little closer to the hot stove because they are freezing. And I can't believe it's not Jagmeet Singh. That's your usual go-to guy, but you're picking on another dipper.
Jagmeet is, he's not exactly ice cold right now. He's doing reasonably well on the campaign trail. I said reasonably well.
It's a low bar.
We talked about this off the top. It's, we talked about forestry, and did we even mention the forestry minister? I don't know that we did. Doug Donaldson is his name. He's the only cabinet minister that Vaughn Palmer, the estimable Vaughn Palmer, has publicly called for his demotion and/or resignation. He oversees an industry in colony collapse. We haven't seen or heard much from him. And when he brought in a funding package, it was money from elsewhere in rural BC. it hasn't been a good few months for him, and it doesn't appear to be improving.
No, it doesn't. He's way over his head. I thought the funniest picture from the UBCM was the one tweeted by Shane Mills of Ravi Callan in the crowd.
Oh, yes.
And he's like, the convoy's going by, and he's like covering his face. I don't know, he's probably sneezing or something, but it just looks like he's covering his face in horror and looking the opposite direction of every other person there. That kind of sums up the NDP's forest policy pretty good. Yeah, Doug Donaldson continues to be a disaster in this file. His multitude of sins have been well cataloged here and elsewhere. If it wasn't a minority government, you can bet he would have been bounced long ago. But
if they had more rural MLAs they could replace him with, I think that'd be a better bet as well. And I mean, he's about to face 5 weeks of session, and it's not like he's weak on policy but strong in the House. He's not a firebrand in the House either. So, I mean, he could have an even rougher month ahead of him.
Yeah, I bet you Ravi answers all those questions, or the Premier himself.
Ravi cannot answer questions as a parliamentary secretary. It has to be a minister of the Crown.
Really?
Well, that's been canvassed before, and I will grant you that under our current speaker, who knows? but
I bet you Bob Maclean would know.
The convention is that you are supposed to ask the member of the government, and technically Ravi is not that. Technically.
I'll have to send a text to Bob Maclean to ask the speaker the next time they're hanging out what's going on there. All right, my cold politician. He had a very nice profile done by him by Rob Shaw, the kind of gag-inducing profile that drives partisans crazy. But David Eby.
Hot yoga.
David Eby, he may have done hot yoga with Rob Shaw, but it's going to get a whole lot hotter for him in the House this fall. As my sense is, we have 5 times 20 question periods this fall. I bet you there will be an ICBC horror story in every single one of them. And if I were the BC Liberals, I would be bringing every person I could over into that legislature, putting them in the gallery and asking a question on their behalf. Young drivers are mad. Parents of young drivers are mad. Business owners who employ young drivers are mad. People who have one accident 20 years ago are mad. People who were promised that they, as a good driver, that their costs would go down are mad. Old people are mad. Everybody's mad, and it's all focused at one wonderful hot yoga guy, David Eby.
You know, I think if the NDP could change things in a perfect world, they would have had everyone's rates go up on September 1st, rather than this sort of steady drip, 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 drip. Mine doesn't expire till February. So, and I mean, I'm not unusual. That's just the month mine happens to fall in. But the point is, only something like, if it's divided evenly, 1 out of 12 British Columbians had their rates go up in September, and then another 1 out of 12 today on October 1st. And so the story is going to continue as this happens to more and more people. It's not like it was a big wave all in September and they can kind of ride it out as people get used to it. It's going to be a continuing. I think a lot of people are kind of quietly crossing their fingers and saying, well, I hope this doesn't apply to me.
Yeah. Guess what? If you drive in British Columbia, it applies to you.
Yeah.
No one's is going down. Nobody.
It's coming. I'm not looking forward to renewing next year.
No,
and I don't know when you renew, but I'm sure you don't look. You have. I mean, you're going to have young drivers in the not too distant future. I have a 16-year-old who has RL. We got lucky. We were up in July or in August. I was like, Jenny, we got to get in there. We got to renew right away before this comes in, knowing this was coming. Smart.
But yeah, when she'll be 10 months into her learners, so still 2 months to go before she can challenge her for her N. This is going to cost us a fortune. And you're right. Yeah. What I found interesting is it seems like almost every night on one of the major newscasts, there's another horror story, another person with a bill, another person talking about how they can't afford to get to work. That is going to be a drip, drip, drip that absolutely continues to drown the NDP. They can't talk about other issues on affordability because it's going to come back to that over and over and over and over and over again. And like I said, if you're the BC Liberals, you're hoping you should have a different person in that House every single day for this fall session and ask the question on their behalf. Why does Mrs. Smith, who's had a safe driving record for 47 years or 37 years, why has her rates gone up by XYZ dollars, Mr. Attorney?
And who does this problem disproportionately hit is young people.
Yeah.
And that's where the issue of affordability has been most pronounced, and everything else from housing to, well, everything, cost of living. And so this is another one where it's going to fall massively disproportionately on young people who can, for the most part, at least afford it. So it's a bad problem, and it's not getting any better.
We need a robot young driver.
Yes.
Robots to drive our young people around. Actually, that's what.
But will the new robots be taxed more
If we brought in robots to drive kids around, parents would disappear. We'd go obsolete. What about our jobs? That's our job. All right, I think that is it. Yeah, I mean, Chinese reception at UBCM, that was something that happened. Brad West with a very weird photo op. Lisa Helps celebrating that she crossed into the Chinese reception. I'm just going to give you, let me give you a little hint here, Maclean. I've never met a mayor who wasn't weird in some way. God bless him. Love him. I was on council. There was a time where I thought I'd run for mayor someday. There's not a mayor out there who isn't weird in some way. They're all a little bit weird.
I mean, your point is well taken. That was one of those
Changed my mind, Maclean.
That incident was a little bumpy. Let's put it that way. No one really looked great in that. It was. I know. I'd be very interested to hear what Jody and George have to say about this in 2 days.
Jody will love it because it's Brad West. Brad West, la-di-da, he's so wonderful.
He felt the heat last week, I think, didn't he? On Unspun, we shall see. But yes, Jody does. Jody loves it when we mention her on Hot Stove. So. Hi, Jody.
Hi, Jody.
I want to hear we're looking forward to your take on this.
Hi, Jody. Ask George if he and the 43 communications people at City of Vancouver think mayors are all weird, because I think they are all a little bit odd. All right, that is it for the Hot Stove. We will be back next week. Maclean and I are talking about trying to do this earlier in the week so that we're not constantly mowing Unspun's lawn with our much pithier, interesting takes on BC politics, kind of spreading it out. Plus Mondays, it's always hard for us to rustle up content. So we may try to do this on Monday next week, and that's the first day of the legislative session, so we can kick the whole thing off.
I think the session actually starts Tuesday, doesn't it? I'm going to double check that.
All right, you double check. Either way, Monday we'll preview it, and then the next week we won't do it on Monday because it'll be Thanksgiving. So who knows?
Right.
Who knows? Just follow the Orca.ca. You'll see.
The Orca year 2, just as ad hoc as year 1.
We're doing it. We're working hard on your behalf. What can you say? It's free. It's free content. What do you want from us? Come on. We're trying our best. All right. Thanks again for a year of watching our nonsense and reading Maclean's very well-reasoned pieces and wondering how I could ever possibly be published by anyone. I appreciate that. It's going to be awesome. Year 2. Big plans for year 2. I don't know what they are. But
stay tuned is all we can say.
Stay tuned at the Orca BC on Twitter, facebook.com/theorcabc, theorca.ca. We'll talk to you again soon.